right, this is going to be factoring by cubes. All right, so when we do cubes, what we're doing is we're multiplying a number by itself 3 times. So let's go ahead and list out the first 10 cubes. And hopefully I can do this by memory. If not, I'm going to have to resort to using a calculator. Let's start off with the first one. 1 cubed. That's the same thing as 1 times 1 times 1, right? All I'm doing is I'm taking a number and I'm multiplying it by itself 3 times. Okay? So what's 1 times 1 times 1? That's going to be 1, right? So 1 is the first perfect cube we're going to look at. Let's do the next one. 2 cubed, that's going to be 2 times 2 times 2. That's going to give me 8, right? So 8 is the second perfect cube. All right, let's keep on going. 3 cubed, that's going to be 3 times 3 times 3, 27. Because those 2 3s make a 9, and then 9 times 3 is going to give me 27. Okay? 4 cubed, that is 64, I think. I hope so. 5 cubed, that is 5 times 5 times 5. And that's going to give me 125. All right, so these are the first 5 perfect cubes. Let's keep on going with the last 5. 6 cubed, that is going to be 6 times 6 times 6. And that is 216. 7 cubed, 7 times 7 times 7, which is actually, what? 343, right. All right, now let's get the last 3. 8 cubed is going to be 8 times 8 times 8, 512. 9 cubed, that is 9 times 9 times 9, and that will give me 729. Yep. And then the last perfect cube that we're going to look at is 10 cubed. This one's pretty easy. You just count up the number of zeros. So this is going to be 1,000. All right. So all of these are called perfect cubes over here. Perfect cubes. And over here on this side, I have the cube roots. So these are going to be called the cube roots. So if I'm looking at this, let's just take 27 for an example. 27 is a perfect cube. The cube root of 27 would be 3. So I say the cube root of 27 is 3. Similarly, we can look at the next one, 64. What's the cube root of 64? That would be this 4 over here, right? And the cube root of 125, that is 5. So you can see how these things go in order. We're going to be using perfect cubes today to factor some polynomials. So let's go ahead and write down the formulas that I know. Let's do sum of cubes first. Sum of cubes. Okay, so the way this goes is you're going to have something cubed plus something cubed. So let's start off with x cubed plus y cubed. And since this is a sum, we're going to be putting a plus in between. And the way we factor this is x plus y And then we're going to have what's known as a long factor. The first thing we do is we square the x to get x squared. We square the y to get y squared. And then in the middle, we're going to multiply the two parts together. So x times y is going to give me xy. And then I put down a minus and a plus. So this is the first formula. It's called sum of cubes. We're going to get to difference in just a minute, but I did want to remind you that if you are looking for these formulas, you can write them down right now. Or if you go to modules and you look at the top of week 3 module, there will be a page called factoring techniques. It's going to have all the factoring formulas on there. And you can use those for any quiz, classwork, or test. I'm fine with that. Because some of these are a little bit difficult to remember. Okay, and the last formula that we're going to learn today is difference of cubes. Difference means we subtract, right? So we're going to have x cubed minus y cubed. So what is this going to look like? So we start off with x cubed minus y cubed, and that's going to give me a short factor and a long factor, just like the last one that we did, okay? So instead of having x plus y, this time we're going to have x minus y. And that's pretty obvious because we start off with a minus, right? And then we're going to be doing the same stuff for the long factor that we did before. We're going to square the x, so we're going to have x squared. On the other end, we're going to have y squared, so that stays the same. And in the middle, we're going to have x times y. The only difference between sum of cubes and difference of cubes are the signs. So some of these are going to have pluses, some of these are going to have minuses. But basically, if you start off with a minus, then you're going to change the sign in the middle to get a plus. So notice how in sum of cubes, you start off with a plus, but then you change to a minus. Well, in difference of cubes, you start off with a minus and you change into a plus. But the last sign is always going to be a plus, okay? So the way I like to remember this is SOAP, and I always tell the kids in class that you probably used it this morning, and I hope you used it. It's called SOAP. So let me write this out. SOAP. Okay, so all these letters stand for something. The S is going to stand for same, so I'm going to write that down, same. The O is going to stand for opposite, opposite. And the AP is going to stand for always positive. Always positive. I think that's the answer for number 1 on the classwork. So just make sure you got these 4 words down. Okay, so how can we apply this when we're doing a problem? The S in SOAP stands for same, right? So whatever sign we start off with, whether it's a plus or a minus, we're going to keep that same sign. So we're going to keep the same sign, right? If we start off with a minus, we're going to start off with a minus. If it gives us a plus, we're going to start off with a plus. We keep that sign the same. So above the first sign, I'm going to write an S. Okay? So S just stands for same. We keep the same sign. The next sign is going to be the opposite, right? That's what that O stands for. So the next sign is always going to be the opposite. So I'm going to put an O above this, and I'm going to put an O above this. And that's just saying that, you know, if you start off with a plus, you're going to choose the opposite for the next sign. If you start off with a plus, you're going to go to a minus. If you start off with a minus, you're going to go to a plus. And then the last sign is AP, always positive. So I'm going to put an AP above the last sign. And there you go. That's how SOAP is going to help us. All right. I'm going to be going through the factoring cubes classwork. There are 10 questions on there, and I'm just going to go in order and see how many I get done. So let's get started with number 2. Okay. Let me keep these formulas up here, and let me write down number 2. Okay, so 2 says x cubed plus 27. What I want to do is I want to find the cube roots of everything. So what's the cube root of 27? I'm trying to find the cube root of 27. That's going to be 3. I get that from this list up here, right? Cube root of 27 is 3. Okay, so I bring down a 3. And then what I do next is I find the cube root of this. What's the cube root of x cubed? That would just be x, right? So I bring down an x. All right, so this is going to be the short factor. And then we're going to get to a long factor after that. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start squaring my parts. So whatever my parts are over here, I'm going to start squaring them. So let's take this first part, for example, this x right here. If I square an x, I'm going to get what? X times x, that's x squared, right? So I put that on the left side. Then I'm going to square the 3 and put it on the right side. If I square 3, that's 3 times 3, that's going to give me 9. So I'll put that over here. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the 2 parts together. So what I do is I take my 2 parts right here and I multiply them together. What's 3 times x? That's going to give me 3x, right? So I put that in the middle. Okay, so the last thing I have to do is just remember the signs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use SOAP to help me remember those. Okay, so let's start off with S. S stands for same, right? So I'm going to be using the same sign that I start off with. If they give me a plus, I'm going to bring down a plus. Okay, so that's the short factor, x plus 3. Then I'm going to use opposite. Well, what's the opposite of a plus? That would just be a minus, right? So I'm going to put a minus right here. And then the last sign is what? AP, always positive. So I'm going to put a plus right here. And I'm done. No need to factor anymore. Now, if you look at this long factor over here, it kind of looks like it can be factored, but it really can't be. Because if you think about it, if you're trying to add up to a -3, but at the same time multiply to a 9, you really can't do that. There's no numbers that will allow you to multiply to 9, but at the same time add up to a -3. So we're going to leave this the same. There's no way we can factor that anymore. Okay. Let's try number 3 now from the classwork. Okay, number 3 says x cubed minus 27. X cubed minus 27. Okay, so I start thinking about cube roots, right? So what's the cube root of x cubed? Well, that would just be x, right? It's always going to be x. And at the same time, we got to think about what's the cube root of 27 going to be? That, of course, is 3. Okay, so that's my short factor. And then I start squaring my parts. So what happens if I square an x? I get x squared, right? At the same time, if I square the 3, I'm going to get a 9. So I put that on the right side. And then the last thing I do is I multiply the 2 parts together. So what's 3 times x? That's just going to give me 3x. So really, this is looking very similar to the last one that we did. The only difference between number 2 and number 3 that I'm doing is the signs, right? So let's use SOAP now. SOAP stands for same, opposite, always, positive. So the first sign is going to be the same thing that we started off with. If I start off with a minus, I'm going to bring down the minus. So always start off with the same sign that you're given. Then I'm going to do the opposite. Whatever sign they give me, I'm going to choose the opposite. So I need a plus right here. So then the last sign is going to be AP. That stands for always positive. So I'm going to put a plus at the end, and I'm done. That's it. Notice you can never factor the long factor because you cannot multiply to 9, but at the same time add up to 3. It's impossible to do with whole numbers, so we're just going to leave it like it is. Okay? Let's try number 4. Okay, 4 says x cubed plus 64. Let's try this one. All right, so let me draw my arrows. And I'm pretty much going to draw arrows from everything this time. And let's figure out what the short factor is going to be. Okay, so we have to find cube roots. So what's the cube root of x cubed? That would just be x, right? The cube root of 64. If you remember from our list up here, the 64 is going to give us a 4. So I'm going to choose 4 to be the cube root. And then I bring down the same sign. Okay, so the short factor is x plus 4. Now let's do the long factor. Now we're going to have to start squaring stuff. Okay, so if I square an x, I get x squared. If I square the 4, that's 4 times 4. That's going to give me 16. I put that at the very end. Notice the squared parts are always going to be at the very ends, on the left side and the right side. And now I have to multiply the two parts together. So 4 times x, that's going to give me 4x. I always put that in the middle. Okay, now we use SOAP. Same, opposite, always positive. So if I start off with a plus, I'm going to change it to a minus for the next factor. And then the last sign is always positive, so I put a plus at the end. Okay, that's number 4. Got about 13 minutes left, so let's just keep on going. Let's do number 5. 5 says x cubed minus 8. Let's bring down their signs and our cube roots. The cube root of x cubed would be what? Just x, right? Bring down the minus, and the cube root of 8 is going to be 2, because 2 times 2 times 2 gives me 8. All right? So the cube root of 8 is going to give you 2. I put parentheses around the short factor, and I get ready to do the long factor. Now I'm going to start squaring stuff. And this kind of confuses a lot of kids, because when you start off, you're finding cube roots, right? These are cube roots. But when you get over to the long factor, you're going to start squaring parts, right? So this is going to be a square, and this is going to be a square. Okay? And what we're doing is we're just squaring these parts over here. That's pretty much all we're doing. So if I square the x, I get x squared. If I square the 2, I get 4, right? Because 2 times 2 is 4. And then the last thing I do is I multiply the two parts together. So 2 times x is going to give me 2x. And I really don't worry about the signs until the very end when I use SOAP. Same, opposite, always positive. That's the way the signs go. All right, let's keep on going. Let's do 6. Okay, 6 says x cubed plus 1. All right, so cube roots. The cube root of x cubed would be x, and the cube root of 1 would be 1, right? Because 1 times 1 times 1. I'm going to bring down the plus in the middle, because I always want to keep the first sign the same. And now I start squaring stuff. X squared. If I square the 1, I'll get 1, right? Because 1 times 1 is 1. And then I multiply the two parts together in the middle. Let me bring this up a little bit. Okay, so when I multiply, I'm basically just multiplying the two cube roots together. So what's 1 times x? That would just be 1x. Or you could just write x. Same thing. Okay, so if I started off with a plus and I do the opposite of that, that would just be a minus. And then the last sign is always positive. So I'll put a plus down and I'm done. You'll never be able to factor this down anymore. So once you got your short factor and your long factor and you put your signs down, that means you're done. Okay, I'm going to skip 7 because I think that you would probably want me to show number 8 because that's a little bit more difficult. So let's do 8 and then we're going to do 10. And I'll let you do 7 and 9 on your own. Okay? 27 x cubed plus 125. Okay? Move this up a little bit. Now, let's bring down our cube roots. So we're going to have a cube root for this, this, and this. And then, of course, the sign is going to come down too. All right, so what's the cube root of 27? That would be 3. So I bring down a 3. The cube root of x cubed, that would just be x. Bring down my plus. The cube root of 125 is 5, right? It kind of ends in a 5, so that's easy to remember. Not all perfect cubes are like that, but some of them are, you know. Okay, let's put parentheses around this, and let's start squaring stuff, okay? If I square the 3, I'm going to get a 9. If I square the x, I'm going to get x squared. And then if I square the 5, I'm going to get 25, because that's 5 times 5. Okay, so now I'm ready to multiply the two parts together to get the middle thing. And if I multiply 5 times 3x, you should get 15x. So I'm just multiplying 5 times 3x, and that's how I got that. All right, the last thing is to put down the signs. So same, opposite, always positive. And we're done. You'll never be able to factor this part, so you got to leave it the same. You could try and factor it by rainbow method, but you'll never be able to find the two numbers that'll multiply to, you know, what you got to multiply to. All right, and the last one we're going to do is number 10. Okay, 10 says 1 minus 64x cubed. Okay. So this time, the number is going to come first and the variable is going to come last, right? Because we want to keep that order the same. So what's the cube root of 1? That would just be 1, right? What's the cube root of 64? That would be 4, right? Ends in a 4. And then the cube root of x cubed would just be x. Okay, so my first part is going to be 1. My second part is going to be 4x. And I bring down the same sign, because that's what the S in SOAP stands for. Now we're going to do the long factor. And what I will ask you to do is please do the squares first and then do the middle part last. We always do the squares first because we want to keep that in mind. When we square the 1, we get 1 times 1. That's just 1, right? If I square a 4x, then I'm going to get 16x squared. You got to square the 4 to get 16, and you have to square the x to get x squared. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the two parts together. 1 times 4x gives me 4x. Pretty simple. The last thing I do is I put my signs down. So same, opposite, I need a plus, and then the last one is always positive. And I'm done. So that's factoring by cubes. This is usually the hardest factoring technique, but if you kind of know how the structure goes and how the signs go, if you do enough of these, you'll get it. I would strongly suggest you try the problem sets, even though you don't have to turn them in, because those are going to help you get into the hang of it. And the classwork, I think you only have to do 2 of the problems on your own, 7 and 9. So those are going to be due on Sunday. Okay. So the 2 assignments that are going to be due on Sunday are going to be uh, the GCF factoring, which you should have already done, and the factoring cubes. Okay. That's it for me. So if you want to go, you can go. Class dismissed. If you'd like to stay after for 10 more minutes, I'm going to be showing how to check your answers when we do cubes. So if you got to go, I understand. I'll see you back on Monday. But if you want to stay for an extra 10 minutes, I'll show you how to check your answers. It'll be really cool, I promise. And of course, if you have any questions, just send it to me in the chat box. I'm the only one who can read those things anyway. Okay, let's learn how to check our answers. So let's start off with number 2. Okay, so number 2, I think that was the first problem that we did, right? Number 2, we had x cubed plus 27, right? And what we found out was the way we factor it is we find cube roots and we go from there, right? Square, square, multiply them together to get 3x, and then we put our signs down, right? So this is the answer that we got. So how do we know if this is right or not? Well, we can check our answer, and it's going to require the opposite of factoring, which is multiplying. So what I want to do is I want to see if I can get back to this. I want to see if I can get back to that. And the way I'm going to do it is by multiplying. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a different pen so I can change my color. Hopefully this works. I'm going to underline the first term. And I'm going to draw arrows from the first term to every other term in the long factor. So we're going to multiply x times x squared. Then we're going to multiply x by negative 3x. And then we're going to multiply x by that positive 9 right there. So let's see what we get. When I multiply x times x squared, I get x cubed, right? Because x times x squared is going to give me x cubed, okay? Now we're going to multiply the x by the negative 3x. Well, what do we get there? Well, I'm going to have negative 3x squared. And all I'm doing is I'm multiplying now. I'm multiplying everything over here by this x. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the x by 9 to get 9x. Okay, so all I did was I multiplied everything in the long factor by the first term in the short factor. I multiplied everything over here by this x. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to underline the next term. So let me change my color again. Underline the 3. And I'm going to multiply everything in the long factor by that 3. So let me draw my arrows. This time I'm going to draw from the top. We're going to multiply 3 by x squared. We're going to multiply 3 by negative 3x. And then we're going to multiply the 3 by that 9 over there. Okay, and when I do this, I'm going to do a different row, and you'll see why at the very end. Okay, let's multiply everything by 3. So what's 3 times x squared? That would just be 3x squared, right? Put that right here. Notice they're going to cancel out. A little bit of foreshadowing there. Now I'm going to multiply the 3 by the negative 3x to get negative 9x, right? Ooh, see those opposite signs canceling out, right? And now the last thing I do is I multiply the 3 by 9 to get 27. Positive 27, right? Okay, now let's add up. So when I add the two rows, what happens? A lot of stuff is going to start canceling out, right? Now the x cubed, we're not adding anything to that, so I just bring it down. The negative 3x squared and the positive 3x squared cancel out. The 9x and the negative 9x cancel out. And the 27 gets brought down. Okay? So that's a quick and easy way to check your answer. You should be getting the same thing that you started off with, right? The x cubed plus 27. Okay? Let's do one more like that, and I'll let you guys go. We're going to be checking number 4. Okay, so 4 says x cubed plus 64. Now, when we did this problem, we found out that we had to take cube roots, right? So x, 4, bring down my plus, and then I start squaring stuff. So x squared, 16, and 4 times x is 4x. Minus plus. Same, opposite, always positive. Okay, so that's how SOAP helps us to find the signs. Now, let's do that multiplying thing that we did previously. I'm going to underline the first term, and I'm going to multiply everything in the next factor by this x right here. So let me draw my arrows. X is going to get multiplied by x squared. X is going to get multiplied by negative 4x, and x is going to be multiplied by this positive 16. So let's see what we get. X times x squared, that's going to give me x cubed. X times negative 4x, that's going to give me negative 4x squared. And then x times 16, that's going to give me positive 16x. Okay? So all I did was I multiplied everything in the long factor by the first term of the short factor. And then I do the same thing for the next term. So let's underline the 4 next. Go ahead and underline this. And we're going to draw our arrows at the top. We're going to do 4 times x squared. We're going to do 4 times negative 4x. And lastly, we're going to multiply 4 by 16. Okay, so what's 4 times x squared? That would just be 4x squared, right? Put that on the new row. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply 4 by negative 4x to get negative 16x. And these two terms in the middle should always cancel when you're checking. The last thing I do is I multiply 4 by 16 to get 64. So positive 64. And now we just add up. Okay, so the x cubed comes down. There's nothing really to add with it. The 4x squared and the negative 4x squared are going to cancel out. The 16x and the negative 16x are going to cancel out. And the 64 is just going to be brought down, since there's no other number to add to it, right? So I'm done. Problem checked. Now, you don't have to check them in your